you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Oh. Well, hello, neighbors. How are you today? I have to thank my neighbor Chase for going with the flow this morning. For 31 seasons, over 900 episodes, Fred Rogers began each show with that simple invitation: won't you be my neighbor? But if you think about it, that wasn't just a song, was it? No. That was a ritual of welcome. Just like we say every Sunday when we gather, because of who you are and where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Or, this is the day our God has made. There you go. This song, as we say in fancy church talk, was liturgy. It was part of Fred Rogers' liturgy. And it was a spiritual practice of love and inclusion. And I wonder, how long does it take for something like that type of invitation, to shape how we see the world? You may have heard that it takes 21 days for something to become a habit. Anybody? You've heard that before, right? Okay, well, recent research says, some of you are laughing. I know, I'm right there with you. It does not take me 21 days. Recent research says 66 days is actually more realistic for what it takes for something to become a habit. But it can take over 250 days. So, like all things with life, we all fall on the spectrum of that. But Mr. Rogers sang that song more than 900 times. He sang it into living rooms across our country for decades. And it was more than a habit for him. It was part of his heart and soul that he shared with millions of people over the years. And I have to believe that it shaped how more than one or two saw the world. Maybe it shaped how you saw the world. I wish he could walk back onto our television screens today, because I think we all need that lesson again, don't you? You may or may not know, but Fred Rogers wasn't just a kind man in a cardigan with great sneakers. He was also an ordained Presbyterian minister. How many people knew that? Quite a few, yeah. I don't think it was until I watched the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, then I realized it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this all makes sense now. Duh. He's sitting there singing a song, asking people to be his neighbor. He's forming a children's program that is rooted in neighbors and community. You know, Matthew 22. What is the greatest commandment? Love God and love. That's right. It all makes sense. And if you haven't seen that documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, it is streaming on Netflix right now, if you have that. And I guess I learned today is the last day. It goes away after today. So if you don't have plans this afternoon or this evening, I recommend you take a little bit of time and watch it. So Mr. Rogers' central message of Won't You Be My Neighbor, it's not just television kindness. It is the gospel lived out in cardigans and sneakers and songs and puppets. He was, dare I say, his own kind of televangelist. And his show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, premiered nationally on public television on February the 19th, 1968. I will not ask if anybody watched that first episode or remembers it. And this was, as you may recall, just a couple of months before Dr. King was assassinated. And it was when protests were high against the Vietnam War. It was when the civil rights movement was still very, very, very much at play in our community, in our divided country. It was a climate of violence and fear and systemic racism. And Mr. Rogers was on the front lines. Not on the streets, but in our homes. He sought justice with his own prophetic voice. And make no mistake, even though he used songs and make-believe land and puppets, and he came with a gentle spirit, his message was revolutionary. In 1969, when hotel owners were pouring acid into swimming pools so that Black children would not swim in these unsegregated waters, Mr. Rogers had an episode where he invited Officer Clemens, a Black man. Does anyone remember Officer Clemens? He was around for many, many more years. He invited him to come and sit down and to soak his feet with him in a small kiddie pool. And Officer Clemens said, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I don't have any way of drying my feet. And Mr. Rogers said, that's okay. You can use my towel. We can share. And so the two sat down together and soaked their feet and laughed and shared the same towel to dry them off. This was a modern day foot washing, straight from the gospel. It was a deliberate act of solidarity and mutual care. Mr. Rogers didn't call it activism. He called it being a neighbor. So many of you raised your hands when I asked if you had watched Mr. Rogers before. Who was your favorite character on the show? Or did you have a favorite puppet? Anyone? You can just shout it out. Eric. Lady Aberlin? Lady Elaine? Oh, okay. I can't hear people. Okay. Who else? Daniel Tiger. Anybody else have a favorite character that hasn't been named? Mr. McFeely. Ricardo, yeah, in the back. The trolley. Also present with us this morning, if you hadn't noticed that. Well, who remembers, no one's named this individual as their favorite character, but who remembers King Friday the 13th? Yes. The puppet monarch of the neighborhood of make-believe. So those of you who didn't watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he'd always open up in his home, in his living room, and then at some point in the show, this little red trolley would kind of go behind some magical wall, and then you would be in the neighborhood of make-believe, run by puppets, and different characters and people would come in for a lesson or two. And that is what King Friday the 13th was, the arbitrary, bossy, and oddly relatable king of. In one episode, it actually played out over the course of a week, King Friday wanted to build a wall out of fear of changes coming to his kingdom. But later, Lady Aberlin, King Friday's niece, kept sending balloons with messages of peace over the wall. And by the end of that week, the king listened and the wall came down. Fred Rogers knew and believed that children could lead with compassion and understanding. He also knew that adults needed these reminders as well. Because in King Friday, as with many of his puppet characters in the show, King Friday was a mirror of our own selves. We all have the capacity to let fear rule unless we let love lead. And isn't that the message of 1 John? There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Anyone who says, I love God, but I hate my siblings, is a liar. Because God is love. We are called to live our love, not just talk about it, but live it in every word and every deed, especially across boundaries and walls that society builds. I wish we could all go to the neighborhood of make-believe today and learn how to be better neighbors. Because let's be honest, our neighbors and our neighborhoods are struggling right now. People are being forcibly and violently separated from their families. Brown-skinned neighbors are being detained because of the color of their skin. Immigration status doesn't matter. This includes U.S. citizens, people who are following all the rules in the immigration process, even people who have been granted asylum by the courts, then walk outside after their hearing and they have been taken by ICE. This isn't just scary. It is the opposite of what Jesus taught us. From Exodus, you shall not wrong or oppress an immigrant. From Leviticus, the immigrant who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. From Deuteronomy, cursed be anyone who deprives the immigrant of justice. These are the lessons that Jesus was teaching the disciples. These were his holy scriptures of the Hebrew Bible. These are the lessons that he continues to teach to us. And then Jesus himself says, when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. When you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. I imagine if Fred Rogers were still with us, if he was still alive, if he was still creating children's television, he'd do an episode called You Are Safe Here. He'd walk in, singing that song, changing into his cardigan and his sneakers. And in that gentle tone, he says, hello, neighbor. I'm glad you're here. Sometimes we hear about things happening in the world that make us feel confused or scared. Maybe you've heard grown-ups talking about people being taken away or not feeling safe where they live. And that can make us feel worried. And that's okay. Because today we're going to talk about how we can take care of each other, even when things are scary. And then, as the little red trolley goes into the neighborhood of make-believe, King Friday the 13th might declare that anyone without an official royal identification card must leave the castle. And then Daniel the tiger says, but I thought this was my home. This is where my family lives. And Lady Aberlin comforts him, saying, Daniel, sometimes grown-ups make rules that aren't fair or kind. Then other puppets and friends begin to gather in a welcome circle, saying, everyone belongs here. And eventually King Friday listens, as he often did. And he says, I was just trying to protect the kingdom. But I forgot that the kingdom is made of people. And people need love, not fear. And then back in the real world, they have their little real world segment that they always had on each episode. And Fred visits a church or a community center that's organizing support for immigrant families. He speaks with someone who explains what sanctuary means, that it's not just a place, but it's how we treat others with care. They show red cards and talk about people knowing how to protect their rights. Children are making signs that say, you are safe here, in all different languages, to be hung up in different spots. And then there's the closing scene where Mr. Rogers comes back to his house and he feeds his fish in the fish tank. And he sits down and he looks in the camera and he says, sometimes people in power make choices that hurt others, but we can still make kind choices. We can say, I will help you. We can say, I see you. We can say, I care about you. And then he ends with, no matter who you are or where you're from or what language you speak, there's only one you, and I'm proud to be your neighbor. Mr. Rogers said that we live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say, it's not my child, it's not my community, it's not my world, it's not my problem. And then there are those who see a need and then respond. And I consider these people my helpers, my heroes.